Brilliant. This isn't a fair slot to be standing. Honestly, it's a pleasure to be here in the company of such distinguished speakers and guests. Karen keeps on doing this to me. Last year at LOC in the Lake, she put me head to head with Michael Marmot. This year it's been Cormac and the Hand Vibes. So, I know that you're going to get a lot out of this afternoon, so I'm really not going to say very much. I'm not even going to try to compete with that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Colin Cox, and since the 1st of April and the restructuring of local government in Cumbria, I'm now the Director of Public Health and Communities for Cumberland Council. Now what that means is that in addition to my public health portfolio and all the remit that I had as Director of Public Health in Cumbria, I've got responsibility for public protection services, and also for a range of services that include things like community development, local devolution, community grants, community safety, support to the third sector, and CALC, the Town and Parish Council network, and social enterprise development. So I thought it would probably just be worth spending a couple of minutes reflecting on why I think bringing communities and public health together is such a good move by Cumberland Council. And also to reflect a little bit on some of what Cumberland's trying to achieve in a new approach to working closely with communities. I've always been a really strong advocate of community development as a public health tool, really ever since I started getting involved in this sort of work. So much of what is creating of our health is bound up in the community and in the social networks that people have. Communities can provide us with that sort of sense of belonging, nurturing relationships and connections that are so essential for our health and well-being. And when communities thrive, so do the individuals within them. In particular, communities obviously foster mental and emotional health and well-being. They give a sense of belonging, they offer individuals a support network that help to combat feelings of loneliness and isolation and stress. And research consistently shows that people who are better socially connected tend to have better mental health outcomes, higher self-esteem, reduced rates of anxiety and depression. Community development can also empower people to take control over their own health and their well-being. By engaging communities in their decision-making, and indeed by handing over decision-making to communities, we ensure that their voices are properly heard and their specific needs are addressed. Empowerment is the key to creating a sense of ownership, of responsibility for one's own health. And when individuals are active participants in shaping their communities, they quite often turn that into action that improves wider health and well-being as well. And of course, strong communities promote resilience, whether that's against things like flooding or against pandemics. Communities with strong social ties and networks help each other out, they support each other, whether that's in practical or emotional terms, and they can mitigate the negative impact of really challenging circumstances. So, for all of those reasons, I was absolutely delighted when Cumberland Council decided to put the public health and the communities portfolios together. They feel like an absolutely perfect fit for each other. And I'm also really excited by the direction of travel that the Council is taking in this agenda. There's a real determination, both within the political leadership of the new Council and within the senior management team, to do things very differently and to put communities right at the heart of everything that we do. Indeed, the slogan that the Council's using is "Health and well-being is at the heart of everything we do." Communities are at the heart of the way we do everything. And just picking up on what Cormac said this morning about the importance of food sovereignty as an indicator of this, my portfolio also includes the right to food, which is explicitly within the Council plan, so no pressure on me then to get all that right. But this isn't about just about community development, it's about community power. We've very much moved away from the previous county council, local committee boundaries and approach, and we've set up 8 community panels. Now, this being local government, there is of course an element of that that's about being a formal committee, but by far the more exciting bit of it is about the remit that those panels have been given. They've been explicitly tasked with engaging with communities in a very different way and a much greater extent than the previous committees were able to, and to develop jointly with residents a local plan that sets out what the priorities for the area are by residents, what people want to see changed, and crucially, how we might go about doing that. There will be budgets devolved to them, admittedly small ones to start off with, but as these panels develop and grow in strength, the intention is to devolve more and more things to them, in both decision-making and powers and budgets. Now, of course, all of this is very new. The first panels haven't even met yet. The council as a whole is only 6 weeks old. And doubtless there will be quite a few bumps along the way. We won't by any means get everything right. I can say that one thing with absolute certainty and confidence, because we've been trying to get these sort of things right for years and not managing to do it. But the commitment is absolutely there. I'm certainly under no illusions about how challenging this agenda is. Community development is really powerful, but it's very, very rarely easy. But the commitment to doing this very differently is definitely there, as I say, from the political leadership of the organisation and from the senior management tier. So I'm absolutely committed to working alongside absolutely everybody here to help take that work forward and to foster vibrant communities that prioritise health and equity and well-being. And on that note, I'm going to shut up so I can do a bit more listening rather than talking. As well as a really good-looking choice of workshops this afternoon, we've got 2 more excellent speakers. After the workshops, we've got Dave Heim, Chief Executive of the Well Communities, which is an absolutely phenomenal lived experience recovery organisation that operates here in Cumbria, talking about what he sees as the 6 core conditions for recovery. And just in the unlikely event that he doesn't do so, I'm going to plug his book for him. Rat Hell to Rat Park was released just last summer. It's a very personal book that outlines Dave's experience, his own lived experience, as well as what he sees as the key conditions for recovery are. And it's a really, really powerful read. I do recommend it. I think there was a comment about Cormac's book that they were available at all good booksellers. I'm not sure Dave's is, but it is available on Amazon. So you can get it on Amazon. And I really do recommend it. But before Dave, we have Olivia Butterworth, who until a month ago was 10 years into a stint with NHS England, leading on promoting public participation and involvement in the NHS, but she's now free, aren't you, Olivia? So you can sit like. And Olivia's going to reflect on how we can shift to a much more community-centred approach in providing health and care services in a way that also promotes health overall and tackles inequality. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you have a really productive and stimulating afternoon.
Hi, my name's Olivia Butterworth. My pronouns are she, her. I don't live in Cumbria, but my gran was born and bred in Windermere. Her parents, my great-grandparents, were born and bred in Windermere. My great-great-grandmother came from Cornwall, go figure. Nobody can work it out, family tree is really interesting. And my little half-sister lives over in Penrith. So I'm really quite familiar with the area. I'm really familiar with the challenges of what it's like to be a single parent living in a rural community in an area where you're surrounded by affluence and services that really judge you. Most of what I'm going to talk about is actually aimed at people here today who aren't from the community. Sorry, Colin, it's people like you. The people who are, and Dominic, who else can I spot? Just a shame. The people who are employed to serve you, the people who are in positions that hold budgets and power and they control the decision making. So, fastest voice first. The NHS has a duty, statutory duty, to involve patients and the public. What year was that duty introduced? Any guesses? Shout out.
1945.
1945, nice try, but a bit early. 1948 was the creation of the NHS.
There we go.
Any guesses?
91.
91. Anybody else?
2002.
2002. 1985. Okay, I was born in 1973. That makes me 50 this year. It was introduced in 1972. Oh. And people are still going, what do you mean there's a duty to involve? What do you mean? Do you mean we've got to involve them? Well, we asked them what they wanted. We didn't really agree with what they said, so we've done what we thought was right anyway, because they really don't know what's right for themselves, do they? and I only characterise slightly. So the NHS spends a reasonable amount of money on involving people, but, and I speak from my, I was the NHS, I'm not anymore, people in those organisations decide what the problem is, they get the data to back up what the problem is, they design the solution to the problem is, Julie knows this as well, then they go out and they sell it to communities and say, this is what your problem is, this is what we're going to do about it, you agree with us, don't you? And we call that consultation. Yeah? Everybody's nodding. That's really a pointless joke of a waste of time, because then those people in the NHS go, yeah, but those communities, they're really hard to reach, aren't they? Really, you're all really hard to reach. Can't talk to the gays, can we? Can't talk to the black people. What are we going to do? They won't talk to us. Well, why do you think they won't talk to you? Look at yourselves. So that's why what I want to say today is aimed at those people who work in the system. Because the people who work in the system have to start with themselves. You can't seek to share power with communities until you recognise you hold that power. You can't seek to work differently with communities until you accept responsibility that you're the problem. And we don't recognise that. And we're not honest about it. And I was this outspoken when I worked for NHS England as well. So who holds that power is critical. And I'm not going to do it with this room because you're a really much more mixed room. You're not a room full of NHS managers. There's a little exercise I do when I do speak to audiences of staff who work in the system about whether or not anybody has been homeless. Has anybody been in prison? Has anybody ever been arrested? Did anybody finish school at 16? And when you ask people those questions, nobody in those senior positions has ever had any of those experiences. And they simply don't understand them. And the conditions in which they work mean they don't get the time to listen, and they don't have the humility yet to sit back and really listen, because they listen with an agenda. Often that agenda is what's their fault anyway. Well, it's your own fault you've got an addiction, isn't it? So take what you're given and be grateful. And that's got to stop. So if you are sat in this room and feeling a little bit uncomfortable because you know I'm talking about you, I want you to feel uncomfortable. Because the way in which we engage communities speaks volumes. I'm just in the middle of moving house at the moment. So I lived in my house in Haworth, home of the Bronte sisters. It's very beautiful. Lived there for 23 years. I was part of the local community. My kids went to the local school. I was a school governor. Yada, yada, yada. Just out of interest, who's lived in the community that they live in now for more than a year? Put your hand up. Okay, keep your hand up if you've been there for 5 years. Keep your hand up if you've been there for 10 years. Most of the room has still got their hands up. Thank you very much. The NHS reorganises itself, on average, about every 2 years. Every 2 years, there's a whole new group of people who come in and go, we need to ask the community what they want. And they go out to the community and they go, we've come to talk to you about what you want, and we have a big, our health, our care, our say was branded one of them. We do these big, big public things. The community goes, I said this to you 2 years ago. Actually, it's changed. Sorry, I used that word. I was given really strict instructions to not use my potty mouth. So every 2 years, we go back and we ask people what they want. And they tell us the same thing. And we continue to ignore it. We've got to really start working with people as equals. And we heard this from Cormac this morning, and I certainly heard it in the Poverty Truth workshop I went to. We've got to start acting with a bit of humility and with some kindness, and recognise that we are all human beings. We are all equally valid, regardless of our experiences. So, And I also include in this a lot of the charity sector. So my background, I worked in the voluntary and community sector for many years, but I was a community development worker. And what we see in the charity sector, and this is no fault of many people's other than governments, is we force them into being service providers. We force them to conform with contracts, so the organisation and the brand becomes more important than the mission. So we do the wrong thing. So there's a charity called Mayday Trust. Google them, have a look at what they do. Mayday used to be a big provider of social housing, supported housing, supported living. They held contracts with a number of different local authorities around the country, and they tried to talk to their commissioners that the contracts they were being asked to deliver were harming people. They were damaging people. They were punitive contracts. And the commissioners would listen. No, that's what you've got to do. That's what you're getting paid. That's what you've got to do. Fill in your key performance indicators, yada, yada, yada. Mayday got to the point where they handed back every single contract. So we can't do this. This goes against our values and our ethics, and we're talking millions and millions of pounds. And instead, Mayday turned itself on its head and started to, well, they spent a long time listening to people, and if you look on their website, you'll see some work called Wisdom from the Streets. And these are people's stories about what they'd experienced, what their life was like, what their hopes, ambitions and dreams were. And from that, they worked with a lot of people about what support they might want. So they developed a model which is, I can never say it properly, person-led, transitional and strength-based. So it builds on what's strong, not what's wrong. It's transitional because people just need some support to help them fly. They don't need to be tied to a service, and we have services that keep people locked into them. We make people dependent on our service. And if you don't think that's true, go have a long, hard look in the mirror, because it is. So we have this kind of colonial paternalism in the way in which we engage with the communities and in the way in which we provide services. So you have to conform to what we've decided is right. If you have mental health challenges and you have an addiction, which do you deal with first? Well, the answer's neither of them, because addiction services don't want you to your mental health sorted out, your mental health services don't want you to, you're not an addict anymore. So what do? You don't go. Then it's your fault, isn't it? So the system, the services are designed for people to fail. So this is where we all really do need to sit back and take a really long, hard look at what we're doing. Are we part of the problem? Because all too often we are. Not because we want to be, but because the way the system is designed is what leads us to us. The other question I would ask you all, so those of you, go on, be brave. Colin, you've got to put your hands up. Dominic, you've got to put your hands up. If you're in a middle management or senior management role in local government or the NHS or a charity where you've got resources, can you put your hand up? Oh, there's quite a few of you. On average, in the last week, the last 7 days, how long have you spent listening with a community of people? So if you've spent an hour, put your hand up. If you've spent less than an hour, put your hand up. Be brave, tell the truth. Truth telling is really important. If you've spent more than 2 hours. How can we make decisions about the jobs that we do without spending time in and with the communities that we're making decisions on their behalf of? They don't trust us because we don't listen to them. So trust is a really precious, beautiful thing, and it builds through time. And if our staff change constantly, trust is never built, because nobody sees through what they said they were going to do, because they're on to the next job. That's why it's local people. It's the people who live and breathe those communities that need to be in those jobs to really connect and give longevity. And that's where the public health aspect comes from. Communities are beautiful, regenerating places when they've got access to resources because they know their needs best. They don't need to do a population health needs assessment. They can tell you exactly what Betty's experiencing at number 9. They can tell you exactly what the issues are with the little kids who aren't getting fed before they go to school. Communities know all of that stuff, particularly in rural areas. So let's look at how we're allocating resource so that we can really prioritise and trust those communities, because until we trust them, they're never going to trust us. And I think that's all I'd like to say.